thank you so much for joining us yet again. Now we head into our topic of discussion. If to just take you back, the Electricity Regulatory Authority approved the new electricity end user tariffs that was which was charged by Umeme Limited for the supply of electro energy in the billing period around July to September 2021. That was last year. And now today we understand about electricity tariffs and how they work around the country. And joining us now is Vianney Mutiaba, who is managing tariffs around ERA, that is Electricity Regulatory Authority, which is the legal supervisor of Uganda's electricity supply industry. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe if we could kickstart it from with the campaign that you were having last year, give us some feedback about how it was all running regarding, the tariff changes.
Yeah, thank you, Rita. I'm happy to be here, and good morning to the viewers. Electricity Regulatory Authority has a mandate to determine electricity tariffs for all the operators in the electricity supply industry, and we do that on a quarterly basis. And then at an annual, every year we set a base tariff that we then adjust on a quarterly basis for movement in macroeconomic factors. Now, as part of the 2022 tariff review that Electricity Regulatory Authority conducted, the board approved two initiatives, among others, that we are running with. One is in respect to the cooking tariff. So we received a number of concerns from domestic consumers, and they were telling us that the reason they are not using electricity for cooking and using charcoal was, one, because of affordability. So they couldn't afford the tariff to be able to make that transition from charcoal to power. Of course, number two, we also looked at environmental concerns. As you know, burning charcoal as opposed to electricity, the impact that has on the environment, and then the trickle-down effect of climate change and its effect across the value chain was taken into account. Of course, also there's the issue of convenience. When you're cooking using electricity as opposed to charcoal, then how convenient is that for you? Then, of course, in looking at all this, we also look at the sustainability, financial sustainability of the electricity supply industry. So the initiative was really to encourage domestic consumers cook using electricity and make that transition. And we also know that there are a number of domestic consumers that already have cooking appliances, like cookers in their homes, but probably are using them as decorations. Probably they are doing gas and electricity, but they only use gas, and the portion of electricity has never been activated. So there are people who don't need investments in terms of the upfront investment in terms of putting up the appliances. So what the board approved is a tariff of 412 shillings per kilowatt hour for the units that are consumed by domestic consumers between 81 units and 150 units per month for all domestic consumers. Now, the thing is that why did we choose, the units between 80 and 150, which is 70 units per domestic consumer? Why did we leave the first units between 0 and 80 to be on the normal rate? And why did we stop at 150? But also, why did we choose 412? Why not 200? Why not 600? So when we did a study for typical households connected to our grid, we have almost 2 million households connected, and how they consume, income levels. We established that for a typical domestic household, the only way we are going to help them make that transition from cooking using charcoal to electricity the only way we are going to help them make that transition and therefore increase demand for electricity is by giving them a tariff that makes economic sense for them to make that transition. So we went to the market and got a typical cost of charcoal, a bag of charcoal between 60 and 70,000. How long do you use to cook, finish up a bag of charcoal, the number of meals cooked for a typical household. So a scientific derivation was made based on the cost of charcoal, how long you take to cook, the number of meals you cook, and we determined that at a tariff of 412, which is a 45% reduction from the previous tariff that we had for domestic consumers, it makes more economic sense for a domestic customer to cook. It's cheaper for someone to cook using electricity now as opposed to charcoal. Then,
at least, sorry to just interject there, because you're now taking us through that implementation of 2022, not so about the domestic tariff.
Yes.
If you could now give us, we'll get there, if you could give us the feedback on the recent, tariff reduction. Euro was running a campaign whereby there was reduction into the units households were using last year. How has that been, been adopted? Give us the feedback from there.
We've seen good feedback from the customers, especially the domestic. Okay, there are two initiatives that we've been running in terms of a reduced tariff for more consumption. Specifically, we have one that is called a declining block. I don't know whether it's the one that you want me to specifically address.
Yes,
where we have a tariff for industrial consumers that we design it in such a way that the more you consume, then the tariff reduces. So we give you a threshold, which is like a target. For example, if you're factory X, we tell you typically you've been consuming 1 million units a month. If you consume any unit above the 1 million units that you've been consuming, that additional unit that you're consuming will give to you at a very low tariff. Probably even sometimes it's below 5 cents depending on the category you're in. So then it means that for every additional unit you consume as an industrial consumer, your weighted average or your average tariff keeps on reducing as you consume more. So it's an initiative that we run really to increase competitiveness of our industries in terms of the region and to encourage increased consumption of industrial consumers. So the feedback that we've received based on our engagements, tracking how the demand has grown and also engagements with the Ugandan Manufacturers Association, we've seen so many industries that have really benefited. The last time we checked was over 120 industries had actually benefited directly through a reduced tariff by increasing consumption and therefore going to a declining block. Now, 120 might seem small, but if I give you some context, is that we have a category that we call extra large. Those are the very big industrial consumers, the likes of Toro Cement, Roofings, Hima Cement, very big, doing steel, cement, heavy duty manufacturing. They are only 43 in Uganda, but they consume 28% of the energy. Only 43 industries. Then the ones that are called the large, really, they are not as big as the extra large. Those are just 500 factories. So if I talk about 120 that have...
We are moderate.
Yeah, it's really a big achievement on us.
My colleague comes in to take you through the other discussion. This campaign, is it bound to have a limit?
No, we are not looking at it. Because you see, you cannot give someone an incentive and then take it away. So if you've reduced...
See those initiatives happening?
No, we are looking at sustaining it into the future. We really don't have... It's not time bound, at least for now, yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's also have a look at the electricity prices in the country. And how much is the price per unit? Because there are actually claims that the difference between a unit for a house is quite different from that of business, and the business community does seem, they actually feel like theirs is quite higher than it should be. First, take us through what are the prices per unit and also the basics for the electricity prices as well behind these prices.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. I'll take you through the prices. So we have 5 categories of consumers. We have the domestic consumers, we have the commercial, we have the medium, we have medium industrial, we have the large industrial, we have the extra large, and we also have one that we call street lighting that can be the 6th, but there's not much consumption there. So the domestic tariff, we have different blocks. The first 15 units for a domestic consumer are at 250 shillings. the first 15 units every month at 250, which is around 6.8 US cents. Then the units between the 16th and the 80th are at 747.5. Then between 81 and 150 is 412. That's the cooking tariff I was talking about. Then after 150, you then go back to the 747.5. Now the commercial category is really the kiosks, the small scale, little value addition, people who are doing trading in arcades. Their tariff, SMEs, but a bit smaller SMEs, that their tariff is 592. Then we have a group of people that we call the medium industrial, the millers, That's where the biggest SMEs now fall. People who are doing real value addition, agro-processing, but they are not very large. And that has been the area where we've been focusing as the authority.
The medium enterprises.
The medium enterprises. Their tariff is 472.9.
Okay.
Then we have what we call the large industries. Now the large industries are around 500, like I said, but they include industries that would range, people like they're doing mineral water, who are doing some steel but not at high scale, that are doing manufacturing and value addition, but they are not high consumption customers, but they are also big consumers. Their tariff is 355 shillings. Then we have the very extra large. These are the big industrial consumers, the guys that are burning steel, that are doing cement, very heavy industries, the breweries, the Nile breweries, Uganda breweries, all those are in that category, steel rolling mills,
We're going to give you an invoice. But it's okay.
So those are 302 shillings. Then of course we have the street lighting. Now, why do we have different tariffs for different customer categories? Now, after we determine the revenue that we need to collect to provide the service of electricity, each customer category pays for the cost they impose on the system and the losses they impose on the system. So if you look at a typical domestic kind of setting, if a utility like Umeme is going to do monitoring, for example, in a domestic house, a domestic setting, there's more expenditure in terms of monitoring, who is stealing power, who has reliability issues, you move around a lot in terms of monitoring. So the expenditure on domestic customers in terms of addressing their concerns of reliability, monitoring that there's no power theft, is actually much higher compared to going and monitoring.
Are you saying it's higher because of the cost for Umeme to move around?
The cost of doing the maintenance, the repairs, and monitoring.
Okay,
the area where domestic households are located. Number two, if you look at losses, domestic customers impose more losses on the system than industrial consumers. Domestic customers steal more power than industrial consumers. And then technically also, as power is moving across the value chain, it moves at what we call voltages. So if the very big industries consume at a very high voltage, and then as power is being stepped down, the domestic consumer is consuming at a low voltage. So as power is being stepped down to a level which you can use to iron, there are losses across the value chain. So you also pay for the losses that you impose as power is being stepped down. So in a nutshell, the reason why tariffs are different across customer categories, one, is because different customer categories impose different costs on the system, and by law, you have to pay for the losses you impose on the system and the cost you impose. There's no requirement for cross-subsidization. One customer category should not be paying for the cost of the other. Okay.
Does that explain, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll give an example of myself. I happen to pay electricity monthly, and I feel like I have not jumped, but at some point you feel they bring for you a highlight that there is a, as if there is a tax there that you've not cleared. So does that explain that cost that comes? I feel like being cheated at some point. I'm like, but why? I cleared all this to zero. And at some point you realize there is a cost added whereby you're going to be cut short of the units. Does that explain that I'm meeting up costs?
Yeah, there are two issues that happen for that bill. The kind of the payable amount that comes as you try to purchase units, that you have to pay at least 4,000 or 3,960 for you to.
That range.
Yeah. So there are two issues. One is that you have to pay for the service fee. So there's what we call a service fee. All domestic consumers pay 3,360 shillings per month as a service fee. And that service fee is part of the tariff structure or the revenue that we collect to be able to provide the electricity service. So, and then, of course, there's a tax component. By the Income Tax Act that as ERA we don't regulate or we are not in control of, requires that electricity service is subject to an 18% VAT. So that is something outside our control that is governed by the Ministry of Finance and URA. So we are just implementing agencies. So you have to pay the tax of 18%, but also pay a service fee of 3,360. That's why the way the utility runs it is that you have to pay that minimum balance for you to qualify to get units, but you would have paid it even if it was not put as a trigger on your as you initiate a transaction either through mobile money or the bank for you to be able to purchase units.
It does actually, maybe as my colleague can take you through.
Let's also take a look at this situation. Flashback to the early, let's say 2000s, we had meter boxes. Currently we have Yaka. And some of the discussions I've been having with some people up country, they do believe Yaka comes quite effective maybe. But when you look at, if you're to compare the two previously, Yaka and the meter box, which of the two have actually made electricity, let's say, should I call it distribution? I'm trying to look for a word, which has made it more effective in terms of, let's say, collecting the taxes or the tariffs of the people. And because some people thought the meter box was far better.
Yeah, thank you, Jerome. When you look at it, Yaka is a prepayment technology. So we are trying to leverage technology to be able to serve the customers better, but also to reduce costs. So one is that under prepayment, which is called Yaka, is that you prepay your bill.
True.
So the utility, number one, doesn't have to come to deliver the bill. It doesn't have to come to read your meter. It doesn't have to come to disconnect you for non-payment.
So you do it yourself?
It's automatic. So what that has done is that because almost 99% of all domestic households are now on prepaid metering, it has been able to reduce costs in terms of the utility, but leveraging technology, because also a prepaid meter is more expensive than a conventional postpaid meter. But also, if you look at the revenue collection and you draw that curve, for example, in 2005, Umeme was not collecting 20% of the energy that has been billed. So an invoice has been raised, it's recognized, the meter has read the units, and then the customer permanently refuses to pay the bill.
The revenue is not there.
The revenue is lost. So because of the technology and the interventions that we have been able to implement, including Yaka, which is called prepaid metering, that collection has now moved to 99.7%. So we are almost collecting 100% of the revenue that is actually billed. So also in terms of losses, the losses have been able to reduce. You know, the losses used to be in the range of 27%, for example, in 2011. Right now, this year, the target that we've given Umeme as ERA is 13.79%. So because of technology such as Yaka, we've been able to cut costs and also drive efficiencies. Now, those efficiencies have directly fed into the tariff reductions that we've been seeing over the last quarters.
And also, we are one of the leading exporters of, let's say, leading producers of electricity here, even on the East African community. But the main fact that we're having some of the high taxes still puzzles a number of consumers. What is your take on that?
Okay, I think you mean the high tariffs,
yes,
as
exactly.
compared to the region. Yes, as Uganda, first of all, we are geographically located in a strategic area in terms of us having a border with almost all the East African countries apart from Burundi. So because of that, we leverage that to actually be able to construct lines that export across the regions. So what happens is that our tariff is actually very competitive in the region. The industrial tariff, if you look at our industrial tariff, currently our industrial tariff for the very extra large is 8.3 cents. If you go to Kenya, their tariff for the extra large is around 12.3. Rwanda is, I think, around 13. Tanzania is 6.6. And those figures, we have an association of utility regulators in the region, so we meet every quarter and we are able to confirm that. So we get it from credible sources of people who also set tariffs in the respective. Yeah. So one thing is that Uganda also has hydro, which is a very good technology in terms of competitiveness. So even Kenya had, I think it was kind of a presidential decree to reduce tariffs by 15% in January. Yes, that reduction was made, but still our tariff is still lower than Kenya. And if you talk to the manufacturers, they will tell you that actually, if you look even at our trade balance between Uganda and Kenya, Uganda has been able to export more to Kenya over the last few years compared to the imports that we are seeing coming in from Kenya. And one of the biggest drivers of that has been our competitive tariff, that we've been able to push, even be more competitive in terms of price with even goods that are manufactured in Kenya. So our tariff is still competitive. The only tariff where our tariff is higher than that of Kenya is that of the medium industrial. And if you look at the trend over the last 1 year, as the authority, we've been having a gradual reduction of medium industrial tariff. I think we've had around 15% reduction over the last 1 year. And even our focus, the board going forward, is really looking at providing more support to medium industrial to make them more competitive in the region.
Okay, and if you could share with us the contributions of these tariffs to the GDP, how do we stand? How relevant are they?
Of course, generally electricity and the tariff, like you said, is very, very critical in terms of driving economic growth. And that discussion has been on. And one of the people have always been telling us that we shouldn't have a kind of reserve, for energy, or what people call a surplus, because we are paying for it, and then it's affecting economic growth. But the question that we always ask, is it electricity that drives GDP or economic growth, or economic growth drives electricity consumption? Okay. So for us as ERA, as we sit and try to plan for the sector, we always ask ourselves, if a company like company X that is dealing big manufacturing, I don't want to use names, please. You want me about a bill. So if that company is sitting in their boardroom and they are making a final investment decision to expand their production, and they need 50 megawatts, like some of the companies do, and they need 50 megawatts of electricity, and we don't have it, and then we say, oh, company X needs 50 megawatts, let's start constructing a power plant. Now, the gestation period of putting up a big hydropower plant is 15 years. Karuma has been in construction for 10 years.
Has that happened? Have you encountered companies coming,
of course,
beyond?
Every day. So for us as the electricity sector, we want to be able to drive economic growth and GDP, and we don't want companies to use us as an excuse that there is no power available, so we cannot actually expand, because you see, if you tell them, give me 10 years to build a power plant, how the market would have changed in 10 years. But if we can be able to facilitate them, yes, we have to plan and put in a reserve, maybe 100 megawatts, so that in case someone is sitting and making an investment decision to come probably and invest in the country, power should be available.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay.
Please conclude.
No, as the conclusion, for us, power is critical for economic growth. And even as we've been doing the reviews leading through COVID, if you look at the trends.
Give us some statistics for the recent year and maybe previous, at least two, how you've contributed to the revenue.
Okay, the last figures that we did was that the contribution of electricity is between 0.5 and 1% of the GDP that you're looking at. Yeah, but that was an internal analysis that we've done. Of course, we used the UBOS reports and Ministry of Finance, but we've not been able to collaborate that computation with other government agencies.
Okay,
okay. Now, let's talk about electricity theft. Very big topic. And recently, as well, in conversations with Umeme, it has actually increased somehow, but the government has actually been pushing for initiatives that is actually inclusiveness of the communities to see that we fight electricity. Now, with we fight electricity vandalism as well as electricity theft across, let's say, livelihoods and areas. But when you look at the situation that is actually coming up, I happen to realize that you'll find out, maybe if you happen to go in slums, you'll find out over 5 homes are using one person to supply electricity. So that is the same person who is having the Yaka machine with him. And so how have you fast-tracked down these particular cases, and how far have you gone?
Yeah, thank you, Joram. So there are 2 issues. There is vandalism, and then there is electricity theft.
Yes.
Now, in terms of vandalism, vandalism is the deliberate, removal of and destroying of electric installations. So someone just comes there and vandalizes a transformer, or cuts down an electric pole. I don't know whether you've been seeing those pictures on social media, or cutting these big transmission towers.
The towers, yes.
Yeah. So vandalism is a big issue. Tampering with electrical infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges that we have in the sector. And if I can give you some statistics just to put it in context, is that the biggest causes of outages now on the network is because of vandalism. The reason why your power goes off when you're in your home,
because someone has tampered with either the tower or
it's tampering with that. It's not because there's a problem with the network or there's no generation. Someone is tampering with electrical infrastructure. Now, what that causes is that if someone tampers, for example, if someone cuts down a transmission tower that is transmitting power at 220 kV, is that number one, you're losing supply. So there are people that are on outages, no electrical supply. Now, if you're a factory, there are so many production losses that are being incurred in the country. There are factories where if they start a process and power goes off, and the raw material is already in process, there's so much production losses that are incurred during the cleanup and all that. So that's one. So there's no supply. There's a cost for that. But also that infrastructure has to be replaced.
Okay.
So if it's being replaced, if someone vandalized the transformer and it's being replaced, you and me are actually paying for that replacement. So we are directly paying, increasing the tariff because there is vandalism.
Okay.
Now, in respect to power theft, that is where someone either goes and hooks, or bypasses a meter, or something like
digs
that.
Underground.
Or digs underground. We've seen that. That is also a big challenge. The way it works is that we set a target for Umeme. I told you this year it's 13.79. Last year Umeme reported around 16.5. So it's an incentive target. So if you achieve it, you get the benefit for achieving it. If you fail to achieve it, you incur in financial loss. Now, if I give you some figures, just to put it in context, is that for every 1% loss incurred on the system, we lose around $6.5 million. 1%. So if losses increase by 1%, $6.5 million, which is around 24 billion shillings lost. So if we have if the spread from within acceptable ranges is around 10%, you know, or 15, okay, let's say 15, that's around $100 million lost. So losses are a big challenge to us, but we've tried to run loss reduction initiatives. You've seen the campaigns that the utility Umeme has run. Of course, there's an amendment to the law that is coming to make it more punitive in terms of the punishment for electricity losses, but also we've approved a number of investments by the utility to do ABC. If you look at the wires, you will see that insulation where people used to hook. Now, even if you throw a wire onto the distribution network, you cannot be able to steal electricity.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for at least having us an insight around there. But we have seen, you know, majority of businesses putting the Russia-Ukraine into consideration of prices increasing. We have seen fuel also taking that lead. If you could share with us, how does, you know, these changes in regards to currency rates, for example, fuel prices, affect electricity?
Yeah, thank you, Rita. So there are two issues. There is fuel and then there is the foreign exchange. So let me start with fuel. Now, the fuel that we use for generating electricity is not this pump fuel that people buy from, you know, the retail of Shell, Total, and all these guys. So what we use is what we call the crude oil. So and the way we price it is that we price it from the source, which is the Gulf that we mainly buy it from. So when the prices of fuel at the international market increase, then it directly increases the cost of generating using fuel. And we have only 2 power plants that are using fuel in Uganda. We have one at Namave that is currently being operated by UEGCL, and we have one in Toro that is being operated by Electromax. So right now we are doing very minimal dispatch in terms of generation coming in from those power plants. They are thermal, very expensive to operate, so we are keeping them as a reserve. So in case, for example, we have hydrology, you know, the river dries up, or we have an issue with a plant, for example, Bujagali, one turbine trips, and we need to we don't want to load shed, so we have to have a reserve, a backup. So right now, we only have 1% of our energy coming from thermal generation. So even with the increase in fuel prices, we don't expect it to feed through the end user tariff directly. So that is in respect to fuel. Number 2, on the exchange rate, our tariff is pegged on the movement in the exchange rate of the Ugandan shilling against the US dollar. Now, there are 2 reasons why that is the case. Number 1 is the financing of projects. If you're going to build a project like Bujagali, I can give you some figures to put it in context that the debt that was required to put up the Bujagali project was $702 million. Just debt financing. Now, if you look at the banks that are operating in Uganda, we need debt in that magnitude, but long term. 15, 20 years repayment period with a grace period of 7 years. So you're talking of 22 years of debt. So the banks, number 1, they will not give you the money in the magnitude that you need, $700 million, and they don't lend long term, 22 years. They want to lend 5, 7 years. And for us doing huge infrastructure projects, we want long term debt. Number 2, is that the commercial banks by law are limited by the central bank in terms of single obligor limit. They cannot lend more than 25% of their core capital to one sector or one company. So the last time we checked with the banks, you know, when we were trying to refinance the project, we established that even if all the banks in Uganda came together, because of that limitation, they cannot raise the debt that is needed for one power plant in Uganda. That's $702 million. So because of that, we then go out of the country to countries that have deeper financial sectors. You go to the US, you go to Germany, you go to South Africa, you go to Asia, Hong Kong, you know, China. Now, when someone in the US gives you money, they give you money in dollars. They don't give you in shillings, and they expect you to repay them in dollars. You know, I give you 700, you give me my 700. Whether the rate is 37 or 35, I want my $1 million. So that is one of the reasons. The other reason why our tariff is pegged on $1 is because the equipment that we use on the system, many of them are imported, are not manufactured here. And when you go to import a power transformer like the one that is used in a substation, of course, when you go to buy it in Germany or Sweden, they will quote you in dollars. They will not quote you in shillings.
The tower is actually 60 million also.
It's very expensive equipment, but manufactured out. So because of that, we have that our tariff is pegged on the exchange rate, but we've been lucky. If you monitor the exchange rate over the last 3 years or so, there's been some gains on average that have been made. And recently, we saw, I think after they signed the final investment decision for oil, we've seen a general appreciation in the exchange rate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mutiaba there. And we're concluding here. If you could give us something that you could just not leave without telling us about electricity tariffs. What should the public expect moving forward? Just less than a minute.
Yeah, less than a minute. Of course, I had talked about the cooking tariff that the authority has put out there. The tariff for cooking, 70 units per month for all domestic consumers is 412. It's a 45% reduction from the previous tariff. So I encourage domestic consumers.
What was the previous tariff?
747. So we reduced by 47 to 412 just to encourage you to consume. Number 2 is vandalism. It is affecting me and you, and we are paying for it. It is the causes of outages on the system. So you as a Ugandan, you know, if you see someone vandalizing electrical installations, we call upon you to call the relevant utilities, the operator in that area, which could be Umeme or UETCL, and be able to report this vandalism. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Joram Sonko.
No, my last submission is that I got a New Year's gift from Era. I have a t-shirt from Era. I don't know who sent it.
Congratulations to you. And we have been interacting with Vian Mutiaba, who is a manager tariffs at Electricity Regulatory Authority, taking us through understanding electricity tariffs around the country. Thank you so much for coming through. We take a break. Coming up is Business and Sport with Jerome Paul. So goodbye from me.